Hello, thanks for joining. Just going to give it a minute just to let people filter into the webinar. We'll start really soon. Yeah, just to remind everyone, we're just going to give it a minute before we kick off, just to let people filter into the webinar. Okay, I think let's kick off. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining the webinar today. We really appreciate your time. Just before we kick off with the content, maybe just a couple of housekeeping points. We're recording the session today, and we're going to make that available to everyone who's registered. So don't feel that you need to be frantically making notes or anything. We'll make sure that we get the recording over to you so you can, yeah, anything that's of interest you can find from there. Also, we've got a Q&A open today. I'm sure everyone's familiar with Zoom by this stage, but there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen where you can ask any questions to the panel. We'll pick up the questions at the end of the webinar. So yeah, in terms of content, so really today, CCGroup commissioned some research last year looking at kind of investment drivers for CSPs and the types of channels and content that really influence buyer awareness of vendors. So Chloe Pope, who is head of connectivity at CCGroup, commissioned that research. She's joining today to kind of give it sort of an overview of the research and talk a little bit about some of the channels and content. And we're also delighted to be joined by Robert Curran, who's a consulting analyst at Appledore Research, to kind of give an analyst perspective and talk about maybe some best practices for analyst relations. I'm Chris Sedgwick. I'm an AR director at CCGroup. So I've been in B2B tech marketing for about 10 years, specializing mainly in telecoms in that time. And yeah, maybe I can hand over to Chloe to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, lovely to have you here today. I'm Chloe, I'm head of connectivity at CCGroup. I've been working in B2B tech PR for 13 years and have been at CCGroup 8 years, working and leading clients across across telecoms and enterprise connectivity.
Thanks, Chloe. And Robert, I don't know if you wanted to give a quick intro before we get into the meat of the presentations.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I'm Robert Curran, analyst with Appledore Research. I've been with Appledore for about 3.5 years, and prior to that, a range of different roles in corporate management, product marketing, communications, and even a bit of coding way back in the day. But that's a while ago now. Always in the telecom space, though.
Thanks, Robert. So yeah, I guess first we're going to kind of look at the telco landscape today. Maybe I can hand it over to Chloe to kind of give an overview and set the scene for the rest of the discussion.
Absolutely. So as Chris mentioned, late last year, we commissioned some research where we surveyed 150 technology decision makers within telco organisations across the UK, the US, France and Germany to better understand where technology investments have been made, where they're going to be made over the next few years, and the marketing channels and the types of marketing content types that telco tech buyers use when they're making technology purchasing decisions. So we all know within the telecoms industry, there's been quite a bit of pressure on telcos for some time now around becoming digital service providers. And if they are to make that change, they need to invest in their networks, but they can't do that themselves. They need to work with technology vendors and technology partners to be able to upgrade their networks. So we wanted to better understand where exactly are telcos investing when it comes to these network upgrades, and how do they go about selecting vendors as part of this process. So according to our research, over the past few years, security, digital platforms and services, and cloud infrastructure, the three main areas that have seen the most investment from our telco respondents. And when we look to the future, the areas of the network that telcos are going to be investing in the most by 2025 are around OSS and BSS, and network backhaul, and again, cloud infrastructure. Cloud is one of those hot topics within the industry that I'll come on to in a moment. So When we, so, you know, there's a clear takeaway here, you know, security, there's been lots of regulations and rules put in place around security that telcos have had to invest in. Cloud infrastructure, we know that managing more data and processing that data is going to require new infrastructure to be able to handle that. So when we asked telcos specifically if there was just one priority area of investment between now and 2025, almost a third of those telcos said that cloud infrastructure was their priority. So the cloud is really what telcos are focusing on at the moment. And the reason behind this is a desire to improve their network energy efficiency. Again, like we've seen with security, there's lots of sustainability regulations coming into place that means that telcos need to make sure that their networks are as efficient, as energy efficient as possible. When it comes to cloud's a hot topic within the industry, but also so is automation. So when we ask specifically about those two areas, we know that, you know, cloud infrastructure is really important for telcos to invest in, but obviously it comes with its concerns. The top 3 concerns that telcos stated around the cloud were around security and privacy. Whatever they're hosting in the cloud must be secure, must be private. Data regulations, again, where's the cloud hosting that data, and how are they managing that cloud infrastructure? When it comes to automation, telcos are really looking to adopt automation for network optimization, to improve their customer relationship management and their customer experience, and as well to attract new customers. But again, there's always concerns with these types of things. The time invested, the time needed to adopt automation, how long is it going to take them to get up to speed with what they're doing? How long is it going to take to actually implement it? Data collection and management, again, how do they store all of this data? What do they actually do with it? Are concerns for them as well. So when we move on to looking at the marketing channels and the content formats that telcos are looking for, if you just go back one slide for me, Chris. We asked telcos about the different marketing channels and different content formats that they use to identify technology vendors as part of the RFP process, and which content formats that they use as part of this process as well to identify and to select vendors. Of the marketing channels and content formats and the content types that we noted, all of them were very similar, similarly rated their importance. So what that tells us really is that technology vendors need to make sure that they're considering marketing across all of their marketing channels to be able to increase their visibility amongst telcos, and use different types of content to demonstrate their industry leadership. So when we look at that a little bit more closely, firstly, when it comes to identifying technology vendor partners, the marketing channels that telcos are referring to are internal business analysts, involvement or collaboration within industry associations or networking groups, and business technology media. What this really shows us is that telcos are looking for recommendations, whether it's, you know, their internal business analysts or, you know, their first-hand experience of working with them in industry associations. And outside of that, they're then referring to how well known they are within the industry, within the media, and the types of knowledge and expertise they're putting out there. When it comes to the most influential content formats when trying to learn about a vendor, industry analyst reports featuring supplier or featuring a technology vendor are ranked the most influential for the awareness and identification stage, followed by vendor webinars and conference speeches. Again, it tells us that that third-party recommendations are important, and again, with the vendor webinars and the speeches, that, you know, telcos want to see the knowledge and the experience and the expertise that vendors are putting out into the market. For the selection stage, peers, business technology media, and management consultants are seen as the most influential, closely followed by industry analysts. There's 1% difference between management consultants and industry analysts. Again, those recommendations are super important, and that prominence within the industry, again, coming through when it comes to selecting a vendor. And then for the content formats, industry analyst reports are ranked #1, really highlights the importance of industry analysts within the technology buying process. Conference speeches as well are really important. So clearly, this tells us that industry analysts play a really crucial role in the telco technology buying process. They're reading industry analyst reports, they're turning to industry analysts when they're trying to identify and to select technology vendor partners. So I'll hand over to Chris now to talk a little bit more about the role of industry analysts throughout the entire buying process.
Yeah, thanks, Chloe. Yeah, so just a bit of background, I guess. Obviously, Chloe's commissioned the research at CCGroup, but we've released a report earlier this year, kind of looking specifically at industry analyst influence on telecoms buying journeys. Analysts are influential across all of the stages, which is, I guess, is not a surprise. The first couple of slides here, I'm going to talk about analysts as a channel. So as Chloe mentioned, the research looks at analysts as a channel, but also analyst content. And yeah, 2/3 of buyers said industry analysts are a big influence on vendor awareness. But I think what you do see at the awareness stage is there's quite a complex picture here. There's a lot of different resources that buyers are referring to when they're looking to build vendor awareness. We see this consistently. CCGroup do insight reports for a lot of all the verticals that we specialize in, like cybersecurity and enterprise IT, and we see this kind of consistently in all verticals, that buyers are using a lot of different resources to learn about vendors, and also involving the vendors themselves in buying journeys much later. Specifically for the telecoms market, there's also specific buyer profiles where analyst influence is on awareness is higher. So in terms of regions, we saw that 74% of buyers in Germany, 70% in the UK, and 68% in the US said analysts were a big influence, but it was lower in France at 51%. I think that kind of shows that AR teams need to be mindful of how they can support wider business goals. If you're trying to sell into markets where analysts are more influential, I think it's really important to kind of have that awareness and know which markets they're most influential in to focus your AR efforts. And then similarly, we saw that 73% of directors, 71% of VP, and 70% of C-level respondents said analysts were a big influence on awareness, and 70% of respondents from companies with 1,000 to 5,000 employees. I think that kind of shows that, I guess larger companies and more senior colleagues tend to have better access to analysts through subscriptions and so on. So I think they're using them more to build awareness of vendors. And then when it came to the selection stage, analyst influence as a channel actually grows quite a lot. So the analyst jumps to 72%. So they're one of the top 5 influences here on vendor selection. I don't think that's surprising considering the sort of complex transformations that CSPs are trying to undergo at the moment. Industry analysts provide really deep expertise into vendors and their solutions and how solutions can help solve particular challenges that buyers face. So I think it's clear that industry analysts provide really useful information to help buyers kind of understand how they can overcome those challenges. And again, we see certain buyer profiles where this influence is even higher. So 80% of buyers in the UK and 70% in the US said analysts were a big influence on vendor selection. And we see similar trends again with sort of larger companies and more senior colleagues using analysts more. Again, I think this is down to them maybe having more access to the analysts. And then in terms of content, Chloe's already touched on this, but analyst reports are the biggest influence on vendor awareness. I think analyst reports provide such detailed kind of rich content about vendors and their solutions, and sometimes through comparative analysis, you can kind of see which vendor solutions make sense for particular buyer profiles. So I don't think it's a surprise to see that the reports are such a big influence on buyers' awareness of vendors. Again, we see kind of similarly that certain buyer profiles are using analyst reports more, sorry. So 57% of buyers in Germany said analyst reports were a major influence on vendor awareness. And again, we see that more senior colleagues and larger companies tend to be using analysts a little bit more, analyst reports a little bit more. Once again, I think this really comes down to having access. Obviously, a lot of these reports are behind paywalls, and larger companies tend to have more subscriptions to more firms, and their senior colleagues at those firms tend to be the ones that have more access as well. And then when it comes to vendor selection, analyst reports were the most influential content type on vendor selection. There's a slight drop off in terms of the number of respondents that said they're the most influential content type for them, but I think the gap between analyst reports and the second most influential content here is quite significant. It grows from the awareness to vendor selection phase, which shows that, you know, buyers really value the sort of rich content and deep analysis that they're getting of vendors and analyst reports to help them make sense of which solutions they should be buying. And once again, you know, there are certain buyer profiles where there is a lot more, and this influence actually grows. So 33% of buyers in the US said analyst reports are a big influence on vendor selection. And similar trends again in terms of size of company and seniority. We see that analyst influence really sharpens as companies get bigger, and the respondents' seniority grows as well. This is again something that we see across all of the sort of insight reports that we do. Whenever we're doing research into buyers, we do tend to see that larger companies are using analysts much more, and more senior colleagues tend to be using analysts much more as well. And then just a couple of other kind of interesting findings that came out of the research. So the top two here kind of refer to shortlisting. So 33% of buyers had shortlisted a vendor as a direct result of an industry analyst. 53% said buyers use industry analysts and content to identify and shortlist vendors. Again, I don't think it's a big surprise, but it's really interesting to see just how much influence analysts have in that kind of RFP process and helping buyers make sense of vendor landscapes. And the last stat here was 46% of CSP technology purchases involve industry analysts in some way. And I think that's a really stark statistic to see that you know, analysts have such a massive influence on buyers. And I think it really shows the importance of having you know, good relationships with analysts, having a good strategy in place for engaging analysts if you're trying to sell to CSPs. Robert, I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about AR from an analyst perspective, and maybe how the findings from the research kind of reflect your experience working as an analyst.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you very much indeed. That's a really fascinating survey and set of results you got there. I hope people will watch it on the playback as well. There's a lot of rich set of data on that. Really interesting. So thanks to you and Chloe for giving me an opportunity to share an analyst perspective on how that relationship works and the role that analysts play in how telcos make purchasing decisions. So as I mentioned at the start, I'm Robert Curran. I'm an analyst with Appledore Research. We're a boutique firm. Our specialty is in the telecom software market, which is really a collection of markets, but in particular focusing on markets and technology developments that are helping telcos achieve what they call, you know, transformational goals. So we spend a lot of time both listening and talking to vendors as well as to operators. And for us, that's especially in market areas that are still forming or perhaps being reformed as a result of disruptive technologies. And cloud is the preeminent disruptor in technology terms, but there are others. I want to just call on some of my career experience, which is partly in the analyst side, but then also partly in some marketing, communications, product management, and actual kind of coding and executive management as well. And that's the intro to my first lesson, if you like, for this process. Chris, could you just move the slide forward one? So I've tried to keep this really simple for people, and I hope you'll be able to finish the rest of the sentence for yourselves. But the first lesson on this is really the journalists are from Mars, and analysts are from Venus is kind of the idea here. I think the PR and AR often get grouped together, but it's really important to realize, and again, your survey, I think, was indicating some of the differences here. Brass and analysts perform really different functions in the market. It's not that one is any better than the other, they're just different. There can be some overlap, but it's clear that that buyers look on media and analysts in different ways. So it is important to understand the differences. Something I think Chloe mentioned at the start, or Chris, sorry, you mentioned at the start, was the need to have a you know, a kind of multi-pronged, multi-channel approach, and I think that's very, very important here. So understanding the differences should inform how you engage analysts and what you can expect in terms of results. If you're thinking about the PR side, you know, a flow of positive news stories could certainly, you know, create a sense of momentum, and that, you know, that can have an influence on the process from a buying point of view, and that can certainly carry some weight. The flip side of that is that the absence of news from a vendor can give buyers the impression that nothing's going on, when in fact there can be quite a lot happening, and that's part of where, you know, analysts can have a role to play. The kind of commentary that an analyst can provide can be really helpful to vendors in telling or reinforcing a more strategic story, and that's important, you know, from a buyer's point of view, to fill in some of the gaps perhaps in news flow. The news cycle doesn't always align with the buying cycle. That's pretty key. You know, the fact that you've launched a new product doesn't necessarily mean that everybody should go, you know, rush out and buy it right away. And I think it's one of the characteristics of the telecom buyers market, is that telcos, you know, although they're in the tech industry, they're often behind the curve when it comes to adopting the very latest technology. So again, having an analyst perspective which is independent and maybe based on longer cycles is really very, very important part, I think, of the engagement with telecom prospects. Analysts we're looking for the trends, the data points that validate or deny some pattern, whether that's, you know, behavior for a single vendor or across the industry. Sometimes the trend can become news, but more often than not, it's just in the background. It's what's happening that you can't detect just from one single point. So I see analyst relations as very complementary to PR, but it works in different ways. I think done well, it's much more two-way than a PR or media strategy. When you take away the constraints of you know, news and headlines and deadlines, those kind of things, then there's much more time to discuss ideas that are maybe only partially formed with analysts. And again, that two-way conversation is very important for both parties. The appetite for news stories sometimes can add to a sense of hype or noise in the industry, and that can skew kind of longer term thinking. I mean, right now, you know, one of the big questions in the air is, you know, how much should telcos be spending on Gen AI? You know, there's a massive buzz around that. So kind of making sense of that, unscrambling that, is a key part of what the kind of the role analysts can play. If anyone on this call hasn't been on a media training course, I certainly would recommend taking one. It's a good way to understand how the media actually works, how journalists work, and maybe in future we should have an analyst training course to parallel that. So journalists are from Mars, analysts are from Venus. Okay, Chris, can you move to the second slide? So just to follow on from the first point to some degree. If you've got a great story to tell as a vendor, you can certainly have, you know, impact pretty quickly with PR and not without an awful lot of backswing. But our experience is that few companies actually have that kind of story. Instead, if you want to build affinity, you know, with the market, it does take time. In tech, I mean, it's almost by definition, there's always an ongoing process of education. You know, we are working in an area where target customers maybe don't know they have a problem, or they don't believe that they have a problem that can actually be solved, or they don't believe it's a problem that can be solved in the way that you're doing it. So there's always some degree of education, and those are much better conversations to have with an analyst than kind of going out cold with a customer. But take the time to do that, invest that time, and that's what, again, a good analyst firm will do is you know, certainly how we work with our customers, to take the time to understand their business, understand the proposition, and you know, where necessary, give them fair but firm feedback on some of those ideas. I think the view that vendors have of the market is also something of an education process. So critical questions: who actually has this problem? Who do they look to help them solve that problem? That's very important. And what are the factors that they consider when they're making a choice? Customers don't always make choice to the same parameters that vendors think. So getting alignment in those two is very important. And that's critical market information that takes time to build. So it's part of what analysts are doing all the time is they're investing their time to understand what's taking place in the market and try to understand that match between market fit and product and market fit across the industry. When you as a vendor need that kind of intelligence, again, working with analysts means you're much better positioned to tap into that rather than building it from scratch. So investing the time, I think, is a critical part of making that communicating through that channel, making the analyst channel work well for you, and treating it differently from how you operate on media side of things. It is a relationship thing. Okay, next slide, Chris. Thank you. Okay, last point. I know it's a cliche. Experience matters. We are absolutely in an age where technology is moving incredibly fast. No one on this call needs to be reminded of that. But one of the problems for vendors is that high telecom businesses buy that technology is not quite moving so fast. So to take a simple example, software as a service, very well established in the enterprise market, still a little bit challenged in telecom. That's not to say it's the right thing for every case, but telecom is certainly, as I mentioned before, behind the curve when it comes to some of this adoption. So the getting a technical recommendation from an operator in evaluation process can sometimes be a kiss of death in your sales process because it's only one factor in the buying process. I think part of what your research is indicating is the way in which telcos put some weight on analysts who've walked that walk, as it were, who understand not only technology and market trends, but understand what else goes into actually buying, reaching a decision on what to buy, how to deploy it, and how to live with it. And that's really what I mean by experience in this channel. Experience helps with objectivity too, because again, as I mentioned, a couple of examples, when you get a lot of hype in an industry, and telecom is full of that periodically, you want to be able to put it in context. Again, this is where we are with Gen AI. Telcos are trying to understand how important is this? Does it matter this year or next year? Will it solve all of our problems or just some of them, and which ones in what priority order? So again, the experience of how telcos work, how they buy, what their preferences are, what the behavior is, are all part of what goes into effective analysis and working with vendors. We do, as everyone knows, still have a pretty high average age in the telecom industry, and that can be a bit of a problem. But it means that buyers come with a lot of their own baggage or history or experience, and good and bad. So again, experienced analysts can tune into that and help to put vendor propositions into a longer context, and that's pretty essential. Those are my three key lessons from today to help be effective analysts and contribute to the buying process. I think the last point that I'll make is that I think part of the role that analysts play is in helping the industry as a whole make good decisions when there are when operators are buying things, when there's a growth market, then that's a good sign, and that's in everybody's interests. And analysts can help to lay the picture out clearly, so that operators can make good, well-informed decisions about how to grow and how to improve their customer experience. Chris.
Thanks so much, Robert. It's really interesting to kind of hear the sort of analyst perspective on, how you can help vendors and buyers kind of make sense of all this, all this sort of disruption and transformation that's happening in the telecoms industry at the moment. So yeah, I guess now we're kind of moved to the Q&A. Just a reminder, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Please feel free to put your questions in there. We do have a couple. I think one for you, maybe, Robert. There's a question on kind of CSP investment priorities, and I know we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier on, and some of the findings from the report kind of suggesting that cloud and OSS, BSS are really important priorities for telcos at the moment. Does this kind of chime with what you're seeing at Appledore, and are there other technologies that you see as being kind of significant investment priorities for telcos at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the industry is pivoting massively to software rather than hardware. This has been a kind of trend gradually taking place over the last 10 or so years, quite strongly. Whether it's efficiency, operational efficiency, or whether it's new experiences for customers, or just really high quality service, software is the way to go. So I think that's one sort of mega trend here for sure. Attached to that are things like the cloud. Absolutely, I said already, it's the single most disruptive technology I think that we've experienced, and so cloud ticks a lot of boxes for operators in terms of either obviously massively reducing costs, taking cost out of their business, and giving them greater speed and agility and so on. So those things absolutely underpin, I think, a lot of buying strategies. I think Chloe mentioned the point in her comments about data. So again, this is now incredibly important. Data is moving to the center of how telcos think about how they operate. And that's quite a change, but it means that all the technology around that, so storing data, processing data, governance, managing it, security, all those other things, becomes a sort of market all of its own. So investing in data management, data governance, scalable platforms, absolutely is key. I think just to go one step slightly back from that, the question is what are the strongest drivers, and cost reduction is always in fashion. That's always a good thing. I would say that one of the characteristics of telcos is, I mean, the bigger you can make that number, the better. 5% to 10% on anything may not really move the needle in terms of some of the inertia you've got to overcome. So even if your proposition is a customer experience proposition that will do something wonderful for how you service customers, the chances are you'll have to demonstrate first how it reduces cost. So that's another just interesting quirk on how the market often works. So I totally would agree with the sentiments and findings from your report. Those are key areas. Gen AI is it's going to hit us like a tsunami. So that's kind of coming. But again, it's part of what the industry is trying to do is to calibrate that. How important is this relative to other things? And should we move now or next year, or how do we contain that and avoid getting overexcited about it?
Thank you. And got another one here on sort of prioritizing investment for marketing. So with all marketing channels rated fairly equally in terms of their influence, where should vendors invest when it comes to marketing? Chloe, I don't know if you wanted to take that one, or...
Yeah, I think it's, I suppose it can be quite easy to get overwhelmed and wonder, if they're all ranked as of similar importance, which ones are the best ones to go after or prioritize. I think what it comes down to is just making sure that any content, any campaigns that you have are just communicated across all of the marketing channels that you have, right? So of course you need to understand the audience for each channel, but I think it's a case of, if you've got a message or a story that you're trying to tell, just making sure you're doing it across every channel that you have. So are you looking at paid channels with advertising? Are you looking at the own channels that you have? Webinars came up as one, your blogs, email marketing was another important marketing channel. Are you communicating across all of those? Are you sharing on socials? And then are you taking into consideration your earned channels as well, like media relations, like industry analyst relations, like speaking at events? So I think it's just making sure that whatever you have, that you're just maximizing its use across all available channels to make sure that you're not missing anyone, because as the research shows, telcos are looking at all of these areas and lots of different content types to make their decisions. You know, there's a lot of pressure around budgets and things like that. So, you know, having the proof, having the evidence, and taking the time to, you know, really do the research and look into what's out there and what's available is becoming really important.
Thank you. Just one final question here. We've seen some B2B tech companies start to use the term influencer relations. Are we seeing that, and do we think it signifies a significant change in approach? I guess I can give a perspective from the analyst relations side of the house, I guess, on that one. We definitely, I think, sort of thinking about all those channels that, you know, buyers are using, there's definitely different influencer landscapes for each of those different, you know, channels, and it is a really complex picture. I think with analyst relations teams, there's different appetites to sort of take ownership of other kind of emerging influencer groups. One trend that we see is that sourcing advisors are definitely an influencer that analyst relations teams are trying to work more with, particularly if they're trying to work more closely with their sales teams at the vendors that they work at. But I think it really depends on how well resourced an AR team is. You know, if you've got a big team, it's easy to start taking ownership of some of those other channels, if it makes sense, and your AR processes kind of fit well with how you should work with those other influencers. But most AR teams are kind of a, you know, one-man band, and they have enough of trouble just keeping their core analysts service. So I think it really, there's definitely a change in it, but I think a lot depends on how well resourced an AR team is at the end of the day, as to whether they can start to really look to own other channels too. From the PR side, Chloe, I don't know if you had anything to add on that.
Yeah, I suppose it sort of denotes how important industry analysts are playing within the process, right? Because influencers has always traditionally focused on me from the media perspective, but I think the use of the word influencers more broadly is encapsulating, you know, industry analysts as influencers and as being influential within the buying process, and rightly so, because they are. Our research shows that. I think it's also mirroring what we're perhaps seeing on a more consumer side of things. But, you know, there are some analysts that can be called influencers themselves, that are quoted within the media, commenting and speaking on things as well. So there is sort of starting to be a bit of blurred lines between media and analysts, and, you know, who is becoming influential in the industry. So yeah, I think it just goes to show how important industry analysts are within this process.
Thanks.
If I could just add one comment to that.
Sure.
I'd love to believe that the use of the term influencer relationships, influencer relations, sorry, works both ways. I think analysts can play a key role in influencing things like product strategy, product direction. So kind of influencing back into the vendor rather than just being a one-way thing. That might be a hope more than an expectation on my part, but I'll certainly stand by the intent to play that kind of role, that market feedback back into influencing product direction and choices and prioritization, and Chloe, what you're saying about messaging and choice of messages and emphasis. It's a really noisy market out there, and finding a way to stand out rather than just talking louder than everybody else is a key part of what analysts can help you do.
I've got a couple more questions come through. First one is how best to navigate the time and investment you spend with buyer advisors like Gartner and Forrester versus the analyst firms that are not perceived to have as much buyer influence. I think obviously whenever we're working with clients, Gartner and Forrester are a big part of the programs that we run. We try to have at least 50% of our briefings and inquiry, and all of our inquiries obviously with them too. You know, because they have buyers subscribing to their services, they do have maybe more of a direct influence on buyers than some other firms. But having said that, I think you really need to think about what is the aims of your AR program, I guess. You know, there's analysts can help vendors with lots of other things. They can help you with kind of market validation, product validation, and I think other firms have a lot of expertise when it comes to sort of helping make sure that vendors are positioning their offer in the right way. You know, they're getting their go-to-market right. You know, the smaller firms and tier 2 firms have really deep experience, and they have influence on both buyers and vendors too. So I think it's important to make sure that you're kind of spreading your time well, and working with the tier 2 firms too, who can bring a lot of benefits to you. And then another one here. It seems many analyst firms are pushing analysts to produce bespoke work and generate revenue through commission white papers, webinars, etc., rather than focus on balanced, regular industry research. This must mean they spend less time speaking to end users, technology buyers. Do you see this? Robert, I don't know if you've had any perspectives on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the market's evolving for sure, and part of that is certainly reaction to that evolution. There's a lot of material information freely available. The cost of production is much lower than it ever used to be. I mean, there was a time when you'd produce 200-page reports and get them fully printed and bound and all that kind of stuff. So the world's quite a different place now. I think the point your questioner is making is a not unreasonable one, which is get the balance right. And I think that's what a good analyst firm does. It is a combination of those things. The reality is that some markets, although they're very important, they may not be all that large. And so again, the number of transactions, the value of the market in any one area might not warrant a huge amount of time spent researching it. So again, there's a bit of a balance there, particularly when you look at some emerging markets. So I think the questioner is asking a reasonable question. I think the right answer is it's going to be a combination of both, because partly that's what customers are looking for, and it's a very consumable. It's very consumable material. If operators didn't like it, then vendors would choose something else. So we've got a really wide range of channels now, like you say, webinars, white papers, blogs, all kinds of things. But you've got to, like I said in my second point, you've got to see that the analysts are investing the time in understanding and producing reports on the market for sure. That's the bedrock, I think, of having an informed opinion about anything.
Thank you. And I think the last point is maybe just agreeing with some of the things that you've already said. And it says, noisy market, but so much is being done behind closed doors, isn't it, Robert? I think you kind of already touched on that, that there's a lot of work going on and a lot of transformation happening. And
yeah, absolutely. And again, that's where that having a relationship with them as a firm to understand your business as well as understand the market, I think is a real asset. And treating it as a two-way thing and seeing it as different from media relations, because it can smooth out those kind of gaps, those peaks and troughs in your news flow. So yeah, all that work going on behind the scenes, year in, year out, the number of events that we attend and conversations we have with people at those grows, let alone the online stuff as well. So we're constantly touching the market through the year, and some of that surfaces in different reports we do, but constantly accumulating that knowledge and that say the sentiment and perceptions. Some are hard perceptions, some are soft information about deals and projects. That's a year-round activity, and that's we are in a global business. So having a team of people who can do that and synthesize that and even bounce ideas off each other, I think is a great resource to call on for vendors and for operators.
Thank you very much. I think that's all of the questions. So yeah, I guess it just leaves me to thank Robert and Chloe for joining the webinar today, and thanks for everyone for joining as well and listening to the presentations. Like I said, we'll follow up with the recording, and if you have any other burning questions about the research or for Robert at Appledore in particular about his work, then let us know and we'll be happily put you in touch with the relevant people. But yeah, thanks everyone so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.